Hi folks, and welcome to the Give Me the Remote podcast. It's episode 48 and we are on Thursday the 15th of August 2019. I am Sheridan and I'm joined in the pod by my co-host
John. Hello everybody, how are we all today? And we are on a date, are we? Not recording on a date. We're just on it.
Would you like to get into semantics? Is that what the listeners want?
The listeners love semantic debates in podcasts. That's pretty much why they listen
Not
to
sure
it.
that's why they're tuning into this podcast.
Well, why are they tuning into this podcast? That's the question.
Well, they're going
Emails to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com.
They're tuning into this podcast to get... I'm going to start off this week with reviewing Alita Battle Angel.
I don't know what I am.
I do. You're the most advanced weapon ever.
But that's just a shell. It's not bad or good. That part's up to you.
Right. This is... I became aware of the existence of Alita Battle Angel because one of the most horrible people I've ever worked with, who's a raging incel and the spitting image of most of the recent murder shooters in the US, was saying, this film's going to be great. It's not going to be like Captain Marvel where the feminists are out of control. This film's going to be awesome. So, on the basis of that recommendation...
You didn't tell me that when you forced me to watch it.
I wanted you to approach it with an open mind.
The preview looks really good, though.
It's pretty.
So it's based on a manga series, Battle Angel Alita. So why they have to switch
Apparently
that
John
name
Landau in 2003 suggested they should put the names the other way around.
Weird.
It's been in development hell since 2000.
It has.
So 20 years.
Directed by Robert Rodriguez, co-produced by James Cameron. Basically started off as a James Cameron vehicle, but then he went on to Avatar.
Script by Later Calligridis from Altered Carbon. Who else who's super famous has been involved in this?
Christopher Waltz is in it.
Yeah, it's incredible the number of really cool, interesting people I would expect a good movie
Jennifer
from.
Connelly's in it. She's usually quite interesting.
Yeah.
Rosa Salazar plays the main character, Alita. She's from Parenthood and one of the American Horror Story series. She's probably one of the better things about the film.
She's okay.
So basically, how to describe the plot. So it commences in a futuristic sort of dystopian sci-fi future.
Notionally post-apocalyptic, but when it doesn't want to be post-apocalyptic, it ceases to be. There's no story continuity in that post-apocalyptic nature. So
Alita is a cyborg, and she wakes up with no memory of her history or where she's from, and she's been put back together by Dr. Dyson Ido, who's played by Christopher Waltz. She then witnesses a group of, I guess, serial killers, you'd call them, a thug group of mutanty cyborgs. Which leads her to try and, I guess, avenge the death by becoming what's known as a hunter warrior. She then goes...
Hunter warrior. Now, there's an original sort of name that basically a 14-year-old boy would think is really cool. Everything in this movie is geared up to what a 14-year-old boy would think is really cool.
In isolation, the parts are really cool. So, I mean, there's this awesome bar fight scene. There's this roller, what is it called? Motorball racing. There's some sort of cool hockey type rollerblading game. For what reason these things are all in the film, I'm still perplexed as to understand why.
Now, I'm sure
And that's the plot, by the way. That's it. That's my summary of the plot.
If I'd read the 1990s manga, it would answer a lot of questions. But one of the questions this raises is that Alita is found in the debris stream of the city above, which turns out is where the evil people are, and she needs to get there. So she has fallen from the city above relatively recently because she's not covered in crap and she's still repairable. She is a sort of cybernetic being. But then it turns out that she was involved in a war 300 years ago. So there's some story that's gone on between 300 years ago and the start of the movie when she's discovered that seems rather important and that doesn't get addressed at all.
Many things don't get addressed.
And then it just turns out that the battle angel body that she needs to be all that she can be just happens to be lying around outside town.
And they just happen to find it.
Just happens to stumble across it. And like,
I mean, it looks cool.
yeah, everything looks cool. And I get that it's kind of been in development hell, and you get problems in scripts build up because people who are too familiar with the subject matter think they've covered off stuff that they actually took out years ago and that sort of thing. But it really boggles my mind, that so many people spent so much time and money on delivering such a terrible story. The story is terrible.
The story is shocking.
And it ends with a unresolved confrontation.
I wonder if they were all sitting, like the special effects people were sitting there going, we've just made this really awesome bar fight scene with all these, like, animated cyborgs, but what's the point of it?
Well,
like, did they know?
Apparently, I mean, James Cameron has never been... Well, no, I wouldn't say never. In James Cameron's recent years, story has not been the strong point of his movies.
To be fair to him, though, he did only co-produce that. It's not like he was...
It's been his baby since... And the other thing is, he developed new technology to bring things to the screen, and kind of that's the James Cameron thing, isn't it? He develops new technology to make a film work rather than working on the script. Yeah,
and you can tell there is a unique appearance to the animation in this film.
Yeah,
it is something quite different.
I find it's heavily stuck in what they call the uncanny valley, and they don't really do anything with it. It's just totally shot in the uncanny valley, which is by its nature. Sorry for people who don't know that, it's the idea that as digital representations of people, so like say Hank and Woody, Woody and Buzz in Toy Story, because they don't look at all real. We don't mind that, but as things get realer and realer but aren't real, there's a point that's called the uncanny valley where it feels very uncomfortable to watch. And they've chosen stylistically to be very firmly in that place for this.
I didn't mind that though. I'm fine with that.
And how did you feel about the boyfriend who, and this was revealed reasonably early, so it's not a spoiler, turned out that his hobby and profession was dismembering other cyborgs?
Well, I just didn't care.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
I was like, oh, okay, whatevs.
Yeah, I'm not sure she ever thought through the implications of his day job.
No.
Yeah.
Well, again, it wasn't really explained or dealt with.
Yeah, or a lot of other things. And, as we've said, it looks cool. Anything else you want to say about this one?
No, what are you going to give it?
2.5 stars.
I'm going to give it 2 stars.
Yeah. Having said that, it does look cool.
It does. That's the only reason it's getting 2 stars.
If you've got 14-year-old boys you need to entertain...
Or girls. I think we're at a point where it's a bit gender neutral. It does have a strong female lead after all.
Although, she's only there for her disposable body, so...
I don't think that's actually what's happening in this film. That character's not actually all that bad. I mean, she's a bit hollow because she's...
A machine.
Yeah, a machine that has no memory. But she develops a certain moral code pretty early on.
Okay, so that's a sub 2.5 rating from us.
What's next?
I don't know, Sharon, you tell me. You're in charge of that.
Oh, am I?
Yeah.
Ooh, what will it be? Let's do the loudest voice.
We're way past politics. It's war.
And bring back fairness and balance.
We're gonna win.
Yeah, now this was suggested to me by someone else at work who whose opinions I value a lot more highly than that other person. It's some of the best television, I think. We've had a lot of good television in the last few weeks, but this is amazingly good.
So, The Loudest Voice follows the 20-year rise of Roger Ailes, who basically started Fox News. Obviously, not from nowhere. He had the financial backing of the Murdochs. And how many episodes are there? Probably
8, I think.
8.
Sorry, 7. It's a really weird number.
It's quite an interesting structure because it doesn't go completely sequentially. So each episode covers off a period
Well,
of...
it's sequential, but there are gaps.
Sorry. Each episode covers a sort of politically significant or a moment that's significant in the timeline of Fox News as a media empire. So, there could be 5 or 10 year break in between episodes. And they don't really explain that. It just starts the next episode.
Well, each episode is named after a year, though, so that does help.
Oh, are they? I didn't notice that, actually. Sorry. So, what can we say about it? There's a lot of fat suits.
Look, I think Russell Crowe, it's a shame that shows like this aren't eligible for Academy Awards.
So Russell Crowe plays Roger Ailes.
Yeah, and he brings... Because for all Russell Crowe has some failings and foibles through his life, the man has enormous amounts of personal charm. And the way
he's a very good actor.
He's won Academy Awards. He's a very good actor, but he's always had a lot of personal charm and charisma, and an interesting sort of charisma as well, because he's never played any comedy roles that I can think of. You don't think, oh, Russell Crowe funny, but there is a lot of charisma to him. And he brings that charisma to a fat, bald, puffy character, which is quite interesting to see. Yeah. Because people who look like that naturally tend not to bring that to the screen for multiple reasons, I suspect.
I mean, presumably, and Roger Ailes is obviously quite a despicable person, but he must have had charisma, if not gravitas, to get to that where he was. I mean, the guy basically came from complete poverty and climbed... He lived the American dream. He really did.
Yeah, mostly because he got into television when it was a new industry and rode that through to the current day.
But he started Fox News when he was 50?
Yeah.
So he was, he kept going. He kept improving.
Yeah.
I said that in inverted commas because no one was improved by Fox News' existence.
Or Roger Ailes' existence. And so having talked about his charisma, he's probably the most repulsive character I've seen in a leading role in a very long time.
There's some very uncomfortable... I mean, for people that don't know the story, basically...
Well, it's a matter of public record that he was forced to resign for sexual harassment scandals.
Yeah. So that's, what this is based on. It's basically the rise and fall of Roger Ailes and Fox News, although Fox News is continuing on, obviously.
Just keeps rising and rising.
Absence. But it's a bit funny because I think the Roger Ailes story in itself is just a really interesting story. You don't actually really need much of a a audiovisual kind of medium, or it narrates itself because it's so interesting.
Yeah, and there are bits, particularly in the first few episodes, where there is some of the underdog story and they wrote us off but we proved them wrong. The triumph of an old fat white man, which is an everyday triumph, but you don't see it depicted in television that much. So there's a lot to like with that. I was interested that I found the bits where Ailes was sexually assaulting his staff much more uncomfortable than you did. I suspect that's because as men, we don't like to see ourselves at our worst, whereas women have already seen it more.
It is uncomfortable watching.
Yeah.
But yeah, I didn't find it as confronting because I guess I just know that exists.
I mean, I knew it existed. They certainly do make that very confronting.
They're quite good at doing
I think that's good to make it confronting.
Very obvious 30-second hand on the top of the arse linger, which a lot of that is put in. In public discourse that, I just had my hand there, I didn't mean anything by it. But it is actually very good at showing, actually, you know what? Having that hand there is really gross and not okay.
Well, the thing is,
he does more stuff than that.
If people are in close physical proximity, not that there's an excuse to be in that proximity if you're Ailes and his staff, sometimes you accidentally touch people that you're working with. And the normal thing is to say, I'm very sorry about that. And to stop immediately.
Yeah, but this shows that this kind of behaviour isn't accidental.
No.
And that it is harassment, that it's wrong.
No, and I can't fault it for the level they play it out to, because to underplay it could have been awful. Having said that, there are a lot of moments that will make you uncomfortable, but as an insight into the lives of the rich and famous and how TV empires are run, and it's pretty well researched. It's based on a book.
Which in a really meta moment by Gabriel Sherman, who appears in the show writing the book.
Looking like Edward Snowden. Yeah.
So it's like, oh. I also found, I mean, it is quite interesting and I think this is an issue more in the US than here. But the issue of the non-disclosure agreements, they do play that up a lot. And this actually silences all these victims.
Non-disclosure and non-disparagement, which are a more recent thing.
So, I mean, for example, Gretchen Carlson, who's played by Naomi Watts in the show, who's really the main female victim that's portrayed.
She doesn't arrive until the middle of the season.
Or the most high-profile female victim, who brings him down, basically, or is the start of it. She was unable to comment on the TV show because of her NDA. And so her husband said, I think it's accurate, or something along those lines.
Yeah, right.
And I mean, that's quite disturbing, really.
Yeah, look, every time I hear invariably wealthy, powerful people talking about how important freedom of speech is, you've got to laugh, because the only people who've got freedom of speech are wealthy, powerful people. Everyone else, they're normally faced with a choice of, do I take, if they're lucky, a big sum of money and sign an NDA, or do I just get murdered in the courts if I try and open my mouth? Well,
I mean, basically the Murdochs paid something like $50 million to all these women to get them to go away.
Yeah.
And then the shareholders sued News for failing to act, and they got $90 million in compensation, which seems grossly unfair to me. But
there's nothing fair in this story. This is a bit like Game of Thrones. If you think it's got a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. I think it's really cool seeing a recapitulation of the last 20 years of history through the lens of how Fox News viewed it.
Yeah.
And
there is, he started, I think one of the reasons he was so successful with the network is because he came from middle America. Well, he actually came from much lower class America. But he understands...
The Midwest, though, yeah.
He understands the people he's communicating with.
He understands the worst instincts of them, and he panders to that. I think
by the way, I'm not saying all of middle America is horrible or bad.
No, Roger Ailes pandered to a narrow niche and pandered extremely well to it. I think there is better in people than Roger Ailes thinks there are in people. Having said that, if we let the Roger Ailes of this world keep pandering to the worst in people, things are not going to get better.
There's some really good performances, though, in this show. Lachlan Murdoch is played by Barry Watson, who's from Seventh Heaven, you might have remembered.
Okay.
But he looks exactly like Lachlan Murdoch. It's actually kind of weird.
Now, for the international audience, there's some context in this that the show doesn't give, that for those of us who've had Lachlan and James Murdoch as part of the landscape of our lives, it's kind of interesting seeing a small section of them which they come across reasonably well.
Yeah.
Whereas Lachlan Murdoch is a raging authoritarian right-winger. As anyone who proudly tells the media that they really like reading Aristotle, that's always a red flag in my book. The Greek philosophers indicate a certain rigidity of thought and love of authority. But also Lachlan Murdoch, lost hundreds of millions of other people's money in strings of failed business ventures here in Australia before he ran with his tail between his legs back to the mothership and then went to make Roger Ailes' life a misery.
Well, I mean, and the thing too is he's sort of somewhat portrayed, well, like you said, quite well, in that Lachlan's the one who's pushing for Roger's firing in some sort of gesture to the victims and thinks it's inappropriate. But at the end of the day, they also push to settle all these cases and cover it up as quickly as possible, and I don't think had the victims' interest at all in as a first priority.
No, not at all. And the other thing I would say is that James Murdoch also comes across reasonably well in this.
And he really is.
And he was right at the heart of the phone hacking scandals in the Murdochs.
Yeah.
Now, he says he wasn't aware of those things, I hasten to note for legal reasons. But, he was running the company when it was hacking dead teenagers' phones and making the parents think that they'd checked their voicemails.
Weird hearing an Australian accent, though. I don't know. I think they bunged it on a bit.
I think it was okay. I thought it was a little too much mate. They kept saying mate to people.
Yeah.
But in a way that
I mean, Rupert has a very broad accent in this show.
Yeah, I imagine to an American ear, his accent does sound very broad, and I imagine to an American ear, these three Australians who keep, and particularly their staff who they brought over from Australia when they were setting up Fox News, who keep saying mate to each other would be something very jarring to the American ear. So it's probably kept getting mentioned in the notes. They keep saying mate. But I didn't want to have sex.
Another interesting performance, which I don't think you would have picked up. Roger Ailes' wife, Beth,
Yes.
played by Sienna Miller.
Yes, I was aware of that.
Also in a fat suit.
Yeah, although with a very pretty face throughout.
There's definitely some pattern in that face, though.
Yeah, and I thought she was a very important character portraying, as is frankly so often the case with these evil men, they need a very evil wife to stand by their side and help them carry out their evil. Although it was interesting, she really didn't appear to fully understand how bad Roger's behaviour had been until right at the end.
Yeah, and apparently that's a bit disputed, whether she did publicly stand by him. That's actually not really an accurate portrayal. Although apparently they were living separately when he died, but she...
He was incontinent at that point.
She was like, I've had enough.
Yeah, but yeah, it was an interesting relationship. It was well played on screen. And I think it's entirely realistic that women in that situation often have a huge capacity for self-deception as well. Or that might be too harsh a way of phrasing it, but they
she had a kid with him and you wouldn't want to...
Yeah, but also she's been campaigning on various family values platforms and all sorts of places. Yeah. She wants to believe that they're the nuclear dream and that he's not doing horrible things with his staff at every opportunity. I'd like to believe that of anyone, that they're not doing those things, but so many of them are.
All right, what are you going to give it?
I think look, part of me says 4.5, but then I can't think of a reason why I'm docking a half star except my own uncomfortableness. And I think that relates to some failings in me, not in the show. So I'm going to give it 5 stars.
I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Yeah, what are you docking it for?
I felt like maybe it got maybe a little bit too tabloid at times. I kind of wanted a bit more interrogation into some of the impacts that it had on the political system.
They're making TV not a statement of facts, though.
Yeah, I know, but that's why I'm docking it.
Okay, all right. So what's next?
Climate change, the facts.
Standing here in the English countryside, it may not seem obvious, but we are facing a man-made disaster on a global scale. In the 20 years since I first started talking about the impact of climate change on our world, conditions have changed far faster than I ever imagined.
Yeah, David Attenborough's last-ditch effort to save humanity from its own worst impulses.
Yeah, because I didn't realise this, but apparently he hadn't been trying too hard earlier.
Yeah.
Apparently a Guardian journalist, his name's escaping me, wrote a very scathing criticism of him a couple of years ago and said, you're doing all these documentaries about nature and you're talking about climate change. And apparently he sort of went, yeah, you're probably right. And then he got really cranky old man in this one.
Yeah, look, this is to some extent climate change 101. And if you've been following the issue at all, it's going to be pretty slow going because they're taking it all the way back to first principles trying to explain what's going on. I think that's valuable in a sense. And given the following of Attenborough, I have some hope that at least a few 100,000 people who might have believed the crap in their Murdoch-owned or Sinclair-owned newspapers will sit down because they just love David Attenborough things, watch this and go, holy moly, we need to do something about this.
Well, that is the most beneficial thing about this show, is that you have someone who's highly trusted by all sides of politics. I mean, he's someone that people have had in their living room since they were children. He's never really been political. He's not a political guy. And
well, on some levels, he's a very establishment figure.
Yeah. And he's coming up and saying, something's really got to happen, and something's got to happen drastically. We've stuffed it. We've got to do something.
Yeah. Do I believe that this alone can defeat the vested interests of the fossil fuel extractive industries? Sadly, probably not. I actually wonder if anything short of revolution at gunpoint is going to fix that now. But as citizens, we need to be...
Attenborough's definitely not saying we should do that.
He's saying we should do something, and if the only thing we can do is to anyway, let's not get into that. We're not talking direct action right now.
We're talking about the
talking about this documentary.
The benefits of this.
There's a lot of animal suffering, which I found upsetting, but that's the point.
Yeah, it could have been worse.
I know it could be worse.
It's an amount of animal suffering that I think is David Attenborough level acceptable.
Yeah.
So can be viewed by an 8-year-old child.
It'll upset an 8-year-old child.
Yeah, but so does David Attenborough's
when
lion.
You watch this little seal getting eaten by a polar bear. Yeah. That,
they cut it off before the real gore comes in.
Well, there's a wheelbarrow full of fruit bats in this.
Yeah, but they are dead. They're not rolling.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they only do that for a second. So 3 seconds of the baby bat dying. And I mean, the thing about this film, I mean, it goes for 90 minutes. Actually, very quick 90 minutes. I didn't sort of sit there. At the beginning, like you, I was a bit like, oh, God, I have to hear about how the blanket of CO2 is raising the... But in some ways, I actually found that sort of useful. It is actually always good when you're interested in this kind of thing to maybe go back and listen to how other people explain what is actually quite a complex scientific theory, or it's not a theory, but...
The science.
The science, to explain that.
And to go back to first principles is useful every now and then.
And that kind of made me go, oh, okay, well, that might be how I might explain it to someone that didn't know or was arguing about it. So that's useful in that way. But during that bit, that was probably the only tiresome bit, and that's probably, 10 minutes, if that. But so it's 90 minutes, but the last 20 minutes is pretty much what can you do as an individual. There is a section on there that what needs to be done globally.
The Greta Thunberg stuff, it was nice to see where she came from, because she sort of blew up in the media consciousness, and taking it back to her first days of protesting was cute, although I love that she was beautifully shot in those first days of protesting.
Oh, so. No, I think that that was reenactment.
Reenacted, was it? Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Anyway, it felt like you were there.
It did, yeah.
And look, I mean, I'm not thinking that a teenage Nordic girl can solve all of our grown-up problems, which is a bit of a narrative that some in the media are putting around. It's good that she's drawing attention to those problems and getting media coverage to draw attention to it. That's fantastic. But it's going to take a lot of people from all walks of life getting knee-deep in the muck to sort out this problem, and Greta alone is not going to be able to do it. Exactly.
And that's why the last 20 minutes is quite hopeful, because it does show actual practical things that everyday people can do to reduce carbon emissions by, up to 20%. If everyone in the world did, or everyone in, Western society where we're generating the biggest amount of emissions, did those things, it would have a measurable impact.
Yeah,
because a lot of the narrative around climate change is, oh, well, we're just Australia or we're just America. We can't really implement any change because, China and all of Asia are off burning so much.
Look, I mean, this documentary didn't talk about the Australian case specifically, although it did talk about cases in Australia, because we're a very climate change exposed country, for all we don't act like it.
Yeah.
In this country, there is the issue that our per capita emissions are extremely high, I think third in the world. But because we're a small population, our overall emissions are small. But that's only if you don't count our fossil fuel exports.
Yeah,
and if you did count those as emissions, which frankly I think you should,
like the biggest,
then suddenly we're one of the biggest emitters in the world. And I remember on election day where I was talking to a young Liberal, and he was saying, "Oh, but we've got policies for climate change." And I even said, do you think your policies are actually seriously intended to do anything? And he sort of looked at me and shrugged and was like, yeah, you're right. But because the coal industry will always pretend that it wants to be involved in the solution and get itself a seat at the table at the conference. and then throw a stick in the spokes of the wheel at some point. That's what they do. They constantly do
well,
that.
I mean, the head of BHP came out, recently and said that he thinks there needs to be action, but that's because they need certainty and they want a certainty for the future, but with the least amount of financial impact on the company.
Yeah, and I think also BHP wants to dig up things that aren't fossil fuel related, so they see
Well,
a
I mean,
future
they
for
must
the company,
see.
But yet we still have both sides of politics in this country. The major parties, at least, saying they see a future for coal in Australia's energy mix.
Anyway, we're descending into political debate.
We are. Not really a debate. We're furiously agreeing with each other. But, hey, if Fox News can do it, so can we.
There's someone yelling at the radio right now. But I thought the ending part about what you could practically do was actually helpful. It actually made me think there is more I can do, and it will be measurable if I do it.
I question this approach because I know people who they're busily composting everything, and they've got their chook runs, and they ride their bike to work, and they're doing and they're buying carbon credits every time they catch a plane. They're doing everything they can personally do, and I applaud them for it. It's not going to make a lick of difference until we get the political will to shut down the fossil fuel industries. And anything we do is just creating more margin for them to extract profit. And they will if we don't do something about it. Yeah, I know, but sure, there's an idea that if we all start taking personal action, that'll build political will for mass political action. And I question whether inconveniencing people to achieve very little is worth saying to them, no, you can actually keep your lifestyle as it is because we've got to knock over the big fish first. And I question which approach is better.
Well, this documentary argues that there is something you can do personally.
Yeah.
And provides some very practical suggestions.
I think it's deck chairs on the Titanic as the ship's ploughing into the iceberg.
Well, I found it quite a hopeful message, and I myself am going to try harder. I should probably stop those Amazon Prime orders.
At least we're not going into town to watch movies every couple of days like they used to in the oldie days. Just streaming all the entertainment to us.
All right, what are you going to give it?
3.5 stars.
I'm going to give it 4 stars.
Yeah. Look, I'll say this is not the most entertaining David Attenborough documentary you're ever going to watch as a pure spectacle or entertainment.
Yeah, it's hard to make climate change visually appealing. And
also, it's as an Attenborough thing, this has got way too many human beings in it, which is always the worst part of one of his shows. Although most of the human beings in this seem pretty cool, so that's nice. But it's worth watching if you care about climate change, just to remind yourself of the arguments from start to finish. And if you can convince someone who's on the fence or kind of hoping that they can just ignore the whole thing and it'll go away, maybe it'll do some good and change their mind. I don't see how it could do any harm getting them to watch it, so let's do it. Let's make skeptics watch it.
Yes. Do it.
Excellent. Do it. Okay, folks, that's the end of the show. If you've got any feedback for us, particularly our thoughts on climate change, do feel free to send us an email at gmtrpodcast@gmail.com. Abuse will not be read out and abusers will be blocked. Otherwise, just leave a message on any of our many social media, and we will be back next week.
Thanks, folks.